The story of the unforgiving servant. He was forgiven an impossible debt, but he refused to forgive a small one, and I showed them the true cost of an unforgiving heart. Before we begin, I want you to ask yourself, what is a debt so vast it can never be repaid? This story is a mirror for your own life, a profound look at the price of mercy. If you believe in second chances and the power of forgiveness, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, because what you are about to hear will change your heart. I sat on a stone wall overlooking the bustling market, the dust of the road a fine mist in the late afternoon sun. My disciples and a great crowd of people had gathered around me, their faces a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and expectation. They had just heard me speak of forgiveness, of turning the other cheek and of loving their enemies. And now I could see the unspoken questions in their eyes. How many times, Lord? 7 times? 70 times 7? They were looking for a limit, a line beyond which forgiveness was no longer a requirement but an act of foolishness. They saw it as a calculation, a transaction, but I saw it as a state of being, a reflection of my Father's heart. To answer them, I told them a story of a great king and his servant. I spoke of a man who in the eyes of the world was a great and powerful figure. He was an officer in the king's court, a man of status and authority. He had been trusted with immense responsibility, managing the king's affairs, a life that seemed to be a portrait of success. He wore the finest robes and moved with the confidence of one who had been favored by the crown. He was the kind of man that people looked up to, the kind of man who would receive a special blessing from the priests in the temple, the kind of man who seemed to have it all. But I knew the secret that he carried. I knew the truth that haunted his every waking moment and filled his nights with a cold, silent terror. He had accumulated a debt so vast, so astronomical, that it was impossible to comprehend, let alone repay. It was a debt of 10,000 talents. The crowd murmured in astonishment when they heard this number. A talent was a massive unit of currency, and 10,000 of them represented the lifetime earnings of hundreds, even thousands of ordinary men. It was a debt that could not be paid, a burden that no man could ever hope to bear. It was a debt that, in the court system of justice, meant not only his ruin but the utter destruction of his family, his children, and all that he held dear. His ordinary life, with all its outward trappings of wealth and success, was a carefully constructed lie built upon a mountain of impossible debt. I saw the men in the crowd, their own faces etched with the worries of a small debt, the burden of a single missed payment. And I saw the proud ones, the Pharisees and the scribes, who believed they were without debt, who believed their righteousness was enough to stand before the throne of God. But I knew that every person, rich or poor, learned or unlearned, carried a debt they could never repay, a debt of sin, a debt of broken promises, a debt of a life lived for themselves and not for their Creator. The servant's life was an ordinary one to the world, but in my eyes it was a profound, silent parable of every soul on earth. The stage was set, the characters were in their places, and the great drama of justice and mercy was about to unfold. The ordinary life of the servant shattered with a single brutal moment of exposure. The king, in his final accounting, called for him. The summons was not a gentle invitation, but a final, unyielding command. It was a moment of profound spiritual and emotional darkness. The servant, who had walked with such confidence, now moved with the leaden weight of a condemned man. He knew his secret was out. He knew his ruin was at hand. He walked through the halls of the palace, each step a testament to his own despair. The other servants, who had once smiled and bowed to him, now looked away or watched with a cold, calculating gaze. They saw his fear, they saw his shame, and they knew his story was about to end. He was brought before the throne of the king, a place of immense power and authority. The king's face was one of righteous anger, a just and terrible fury that would have been enough to crumble a lesser man. The servant's knees buckled. He fell to the floor, his face in the dust, the silk of his fine robes now soiled and worthless. The king, in a voice that held the weight of all his power, spoke the decree. Bring him his final accounting. He must repay what is owed, and if he cannot, he and his family, his children, and all that he has shall be sold into slavery to satisfy the debt. The words were a hammer blow. The crowd, who had once looked up to this man, now saw him for what he truly was: a debtor, a slave, a man of no value. This was the crack in his ordinary world. It was the moment the earth opened beneath him and he saw his own abyss. His years of service, his careful facade of success, all of it had been for nothing. His life was about to be taken away from him, his family scattered, his dignity stripped. He was at the end of his road and there was no escape. The terror in his heart was a physical presence, a cold hand that gripped his very soul. He had no plan, no hope, no one to turn to. He was alone, utterly and completely in the face of an impossible debt. In that moment of total despair, his eyes, once so proud, looked at the king, not as a source of justice, but as a last hope for mercy. He saw the face of the king, a man who held his life and death in his hands. It was the moment of reckoning, the final, agonizing reality that he was about to lose everything. The crack was not in the earth, it was in his soul, a fissure that was about to unleash a flood of desperation and surrender. The time for pride was over. The time for begging had come. The servant's breaking point was not a moment of despair, but of complete and total surrender. He had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. He prostrated himself before the king, a man of great wealth and power now reduced to a begging, whimpering creature. He clutched at the king's robes, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Have patience with me and I will pay you everything." The words were a lie, a desperate, hollow promise that he knew he could never keep. 10,000 talents was an impossible sum, but in his terror it was all he could offer. He was offering a false hope to a king who knew the truth. But the king, moved not by the servant's promise but by a profound and unexpected compassion, did the unthinkable. My voice as I told the story was filled with the wonder of this moment. The king had compassion on that servant and released him and forgave him the debt. The silence that followed my words was deafening. The crowd, the scribes, my disciples, all of them were stunned. They had expected justice, a final public humiliation. They had expected the man to be punished. But what they received was mercy, a boundless, unmerited gift that defied all logic and reason. The servant's heart was no longer filled with terror, but with an overwhelming, unimaginable sense of relief. The burden of 10,000 talents was gone. The weight of his past, the shadow of his future, all of it had vanished in an instant. He was a new man, a free man, a man who had been given a second chance he could never have earned or deserved. He rose from the dust, his face no longer filled with shame, but with a pure, unadulterated joy that could not be contained. He had been given everything. He had been given life. He had been given grace. His breaking point was not the moment he was condemned, but the moment he was completely, unconditionally forgiven. He was a living testament to the limitless generosity of the king. His heart should have been overflowing with a gratitude that would last a lifetime. He should have spent every moment of his newfound freedom praising the one who had set him free. His life from that day forward should have been an endless song of thanksgiving, a testament to the boundless love and mercy of his king. The king's forgiveness was a gift so immense, so incomprehensible, that it should have changed the very nature of his heart. And for a moment I believe that it did. The profound spiritual shift in the man's life should have been eternal, but the story reveals how quickly his heart hardened again. He left the king's palace, his soul soaring with the relief of a man who had just been released from the grave. He was free, and his freedom was a gift of immeasurable value. The weight of 10,000 talents was gone, and he felt as if he could fly. He walked through the streets, his face a portrait of joy, a testament to the power of mercy. But as he walked, he encountered a fellow servant, a man who owed him a very small debt. It was 100 denarii, a tiny fraction of the debt that had just been forgiven him. 100 denarii was the equivalent of 100 days' wages, a small but manageable sum. The servant who was in debt approached him with a timid, hopeful look in his eyes. He asked for patience, a little more time to gather the money. "Have patience with me and I will pay you," he said, using the very same words the unforgiving servant had used before the king. The shift was immediate and horrifying. The servant's face, so recently filled with joy, was now contorted with a cold, merciless rage. All the memory of his own impossible forgiveness seemed to have vanished from his heart. The grace he had just received, the boundless love that had just saved him, seemed to have been completely forgotten. He grabbed his fellow servant by the throat, his eyes filled with a terrifying fury. "Pay me what you owe me," he snarled, the words a hammer blow to the man's soul. He pleaded for patience, for a little more time. But the unforgiving servant had no mercy. He had been given a gift so immense that it could not be measured. and yet he was unwilling to extend a small kindness to his fellow man. He had just been set free from a debt that would have destroyed his life, and yet he was now destroying the life of another over a debt that was a tiny whisper in a world of roars. He had been shown a mercy so profound that it was a revelation, and yet he was now showing a cruelty so callous that it was a betrayal. The shift was not just in his attitude, it was in his heart. The grace he had received had not softened his heart. It had only hardened it. He had a choice to be a living testament to the power of forgiveness, but he chose to be a living testament to the power of unforgiveness. The purpose of this parable was not just to tell a story, it was to reveal the very nature of my Father's kingdom. I was not speaking of money or debt, but of the heart. The unforgiving servant was a living, breathing sermon on the true cost of a life without mercy. The king heard of the servant's actions, and his heart was filled with a just and righteous anger. He was not angry about the money. He was angry about the betrayal of his grace. He was furious that the forgiveness he had given had not been a cause for mercy, but a cause for cruelty. He called the servant back to him, his face no longer filled with compassion, but with a profound disappointment. "You wicked servant. I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not also have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you?" The words were a quiet, devastating judgment. The servant had misunderstood the very nature of grace. He had thought it was a one-time transaction, a gift to be received, not a living principle to be embodied. He had been forgiven, but he had not learned to forgive. His heart, once so full of gratitude, was now a cold, barren wasteland of bitterness and resentment. I told my disciples that if they do not forgive others, their Father in heaven will not forgive them. This was a profound and difficult truth to hear. They had come to me looking for a limit to forgiveness, a number beyond which they could say, "I have done enough." But I was showing them that forgiveness is not a number. It is a heart. It is a heart that has been so overwhelmed by the grace it has received that it cannot help but pour that grace out onto others. The purpose of this parable was to show them that a heart that cannot forgive is a heart that does not truly understand the forgiveness it has received. The king's mercy was a boundless gift, and now it's your turn to pass it on. The servant was forgiven everything, but he chose to hold on to a debt that was a tiny whisper. Don't let your heart become a prison. If this story touched your soul, share it with someone who needs to hear about grace and forgiveness, and subscribe to our channel to continue exploring the truths that set us free. The story ends with a final somber judgment. The king, filled with a just and righteous anger, handed the unforgiving servant over to the jailers to be tortured until he had paid the impossible debt he owed. The very debt that had been forgiven was now reinstated, a final and terrible consequence for his unforgiving heart. The man who had been given everything now had nothing, a prisoner of his own bitterness and unforgiveness. The closing impact of this parable is felt not in the fictional servant, but in the hearts of every person who has ever heard this story. It is a profound and unsettling truth. The greatest gift we can receive, the forgiveness of our own impossible debt, is not just a gift to be cherished, but a command to be lived out in our own lives. We are not just receivers of grace, we are channels of it. The unforgiving servant story is a profound warning that a heart that is not willing to forgive is a heart that will never truly be free. So, as I look upon you, my children, I see your own debts, the debts of your past, the debts of your own sins. I have forgiven you. I have paid your impossible debt. But now you must go out and forgive your brothers and sisters. Forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a profound strength. It is the very act that sets you free, that allows you to live a life of peace, and that allows you to become a living testament to the boundless love and mercy of your God. So go now and be the forgivers, for it is in the act of giving mercy that you truly understand the mercy you have received.